2 Timothy chapter 1 verse 11 and 12. For which I was appointed a preacher, an apostle, and teacher, which is why I suffer as I do. But I am not ashamed, for I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard until that day what has been entrusted to me. Paul is offering himself as an example here of what he has urged Timothy to do in verse 8, and he presents the gospel in verse 9 and 10. Now Paul says that he was appointed a preacher, an apostle, and teacher for that gospel. As a preacher, to share the greatest news ever told, an apostle, the one sent with a specific commission from God, and as a teacher, to share the great doctrines of faith. He marvels at this privilege. And in verse 12 he says, which is why I suffer as I do. And then he gives the reason why he is not ashamed of the Lord. He says, for I know whom I have believed. Romans 10:11 says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. It all comes down to belief in the Lord. To the degree that we trust and believe in the Lord, to that degree we will be useful for God's purposes. We have another reason here besides belief. Paul also says that I'm convinced that he is able to guard until that day what has been entrusted to me. The deposit entrusted, we know, is the gospel. In 1 Timothy 6:20 and 2 Timothy 1:14, Paul says, guard the deposit entrusted to you, where we see that the responsibility is on Timothy, but here in verse 12, it is God who guards it. Paul gives no room for us to blame God for our failure to guard what is entrusted to us, and at the same time gives no room for us to be arrogant, thinking we can do this all by ourselves. Paul is humble enough to give the credit to God for his suffering for the gospel. And he says in the verse, until that day. Paul lived with absolute certainty that God would guard his life's commitment to the gospel until the great day of Christ's return. Have a blessed day.